Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, welcome to HBX's product overview webinar for April 14th, 2020. Before we begin that webinar, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Kevin Vieira, Sales and Marketing with HBX. And any questions during the webinar, feel free to just type any of your questions into the GoToWebinar questionnaire box, and throughout the webinar or maybe at the end of the webinar, I'll wait to answer all the questions. I'll answer them then, or I may do them during the webinar, but feel free to have any questions just to do it in the webinar. If not, you can always email info@hbxcontrols.com afterwards, and we'll reply your questions through email as well. So to begin the webinar, just kind of give you guys a little background information about HBX Controls. So we're a privately owned company out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. For you guys out in the US, pretty much we're half an hour away from the Rocky Mountains. The company was founded back in 2013, so we've been in business for 17 years now. And we design, engineer, manufacture all our hydronic heating and cooling controls, typically for the residential, commercial, and as well as the industrial applications on there. We do everything all in-house. We don't go anything third-party, so even all the IoT, the service stuff that we do now, it's all done by HBX. So if there's ever an issue on site, we know how to, correctly correct that issue, very fast, because, we are the ones that have designed and manufactured all our controls. All our controls are ETIL listed, and they also meet UL and CSA approved standards as well. For you guys looking in terms of using our controls and looking for technical support, we do offer that. So from Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, we do have provide technical support through toll-free calls. So don't have to worry about long distance charges, and we can help you pretty much knock out anything, either from wiring to programming, or if you just simply need to know what control I need for this application, feel free to call that technical support on there. We do also offer technical support through our website online, so there is a live chat. So if you're just looking for some information, or again, just need a technical question, you have that option as well using that live chat. We also have a lot of good resources on our website, so if you need manuals or you need a wiring schematic, we do have a system designer built in, where it's a free system that we offer online that you simply just add ask a couple questions about your application. Once you've answered those questions, we'll actually populate the controls needed for that application on there. And depending on what application you're asking for, we may provide you with a wiring schematic for that as well on there, which is just done through Visio on there. So feel free to check that out on our website. So for our product line, we offer everything from boiler controllers to geothermal heat pump controllers, snow melt zone controllers, wireless, and as well as solar controls. So for this webinar, we're going to just lightly touch on each application and kind of just let you know what each controller can do and what we can offer. We also have numerous, about 4 or 5 different webinars this month that we're offering that can kind of goes through each control application more in depth in terms of how you would wire up this controller, what programming and what troubleshooting things you would look for if you ever do encounter an issue with the controller on there. So feel free to register for those webinars either through the website, or if you're a subscriber to our newsletter, you would get those emails of how to register for those webinars on there. So with all our controllers, we spent the last 4 or 5 years kind of trying to develop everything to connect to a Wi-Fi network. We're not going through like a BACnet or a Modbus communication, just because that technology is starting to get a little outdated, and pretty much every commercial, residential workplace now has some sort of Wi-Fi network available. So typically with almost HBX controllers, there's either a built-in external Wi-Fi communication protocol, or use a TherMolinX Wi-Fi module to connect your system online. But the capability of having all these different controllers able to connect online is that you can add all these controllers onto one location on the HBX ThermoLinx app on there. So it makes everything a lot less simple, where you may have a pump that has an app, your boiler might have an app. So if you use our controllers, you can have all these, different components all on one app, which is real nice. The end user, typically doesn't want to navigate between 3 or 4 different apps, especially for the residential user. So it's kind of nice that you can have everything on one app, again, using that HBX ThermoLinx app on there, which is available for Apple and Android devices. It's free of charge. There's no monthly subscription to that. And all our controllers have a built-in identifier. So you simply just add on that sync code or password, connect your controller to your Wi-Fi network, which we'll talk about later in the webinar, and that's it. It's just real nice user-friendly, and you have pretty much that controller in your pocket. So we do have a contractor settings in there, so if you want to really have more control of that controller through the app, there's a contractor's code that will unlock those settings, but we're able to access pretty much all your settings and parameters and monitor in real time what your controller is actually doing using this ThermoLinx HYDRONIC network on there. So to start the webinar, we're going to talk about our snowmelt controllers. Then we're going to talk about a little bit about our zone controllers, then followed by our new heat metering application, which is our BTU meter sensors, and then we'll also finish off the webinar talking about our boiler controls as well as our geothermal heat pump controllers on there. So within the HBX snowmelt controller solutions, we offer one controller, which is real nice. So typically how we go to market is that we try to limit the amount of SKUs for each application. So with our snowmelt controller, it's just one controller. Every other application is just minimal, 1 or 2 SKUs for each application. So we try to put as many control options into one controller, which makes everyone's life a lot easier. We don't have to, bombard you guys with, 1,000 different SKUs typically for each application, or you're just going to have either 1 or 2 application controllers on there. So in terms of snowmelt, we have our snowmelt controller, which is our Snow 550. We have our optical snowmelt sensor, which is our Snow 0110. And we also have the snowmelt sensor enclosure, socket, and dead sensor, which is our Snow-0111. So typically you will need all 3 components with your HBX snowmelt system. We do give you a remote sensor for remote applications, which comes included with that optical sensor. Very limited amount of SKUs that you actually need in terms of controlling your snowmelt system on there. So what really separates us from everyone else is really this sensor that goes outside in slab. So typical what you see in the market nowadays is you'll see a brass continuity sensor. Typically these are like Tecmar sensors, Calefi, Roth has a metal continuity sensor, heat timer as well. But we use optics. So what advantage that allows us to do is that we can actually see snowfall. So since we can actually see snowfall, we can actually turn on your system based on the snowfall rate intensity you want it to come on there. So for commercial users, you're going to want it to come on right away. You don't want anyone slipping or sliding on your property for liability issues on there, so it'll turn on right away. For a residential application, you may not necessarily want it to come on right away, just because snow melting systems typically aren't cheap. So you may want it to come on a little bit later and turn off a little bit sooner rather than all the time, just because you're going to have the same outcome, and you can by turning it on later and turning it off sooner, you'll save a ton on your utility bills at the end of the month on there. So how that really works in terms of functionality wise is that the optical sensor has a built-in heater on there. So when it's cold outside and when it's in the winter months, it's going to be turned on all the time. So we have an outdoor sensor that works in conjunction with our snowmelt controller, telling them that, hey, we're above freezing, we're going to be turning on, and this turns on the heater and the optical sensor. So it will, and this heater puts off a lot of heat. Usually when it's been running on for more than 1 hour, it's usually putting off about 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit of heat on there. So it gets pretty warm. So obviously when snow makes contact with our optical sensor, it'll melt that snow and form a puddle. So the optics measures the light refraction of that water to determine the intensity of what is actually snowing at the time on there. So if you were to set it to our most sensitive setting, which is very light, after about a minute of snowfall hits our sensor, it'll trigger a melt mode. But say you had a residential home and you set it to a light setting or a very light or a moderate setting or even a heavy setting, it won't actually come on after a couple of inches of snowfall, so saving you on utilities. So you know, there's a lot of scenarios where you may not want it to turn on. Say you have, you know, teenagers and you only want it to come on after, you know, snow's about 3 or 4 inches of snow, or if you have a vacation home that you only go to maybe once or twice a month, you know, in those winter months, you really don't want your snow melt system to be running all the time. So that really gives us the flexibility, you know, compared to other people, sensors where it's just really just a moisture sensor, and once a drop of snow hits it, it automatically turns on, triggering 8-hour snow melt mode when maybe it's just, you know, some snow has actually fell on to that sensor. So with our sensor, it actually has a snowfall indicator on there as well. So in that rare scenario where maybe you were backing out of your driveway and you had some snow on your truck and it were to fall on that sensor, it won't actually trigger, it'll melt that snow, but actually won't trigger. The sensor knows that, hey, some snow just got on it. It's not actually snowing. We won't trigger a melt mode. Whereas, you know, if you were using, you know, a TECMAR sensor, it would just assume that it's snowing and would trigger 8-hour snow melt mode, depending on how many hours you put into that controller. So that's where you kind of get the advantage of using the optics in terms of your snow melt sensor on there. So we do have capability of using that sensor remotely. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the slab. There's a lot of different reasons why you wouldn't want to have a slab. Maybe the slope is, you know, really steep, or depending on what you're using, maybe you want to use pavers. Maybe not be an option to use that into those pavers, so you can mount this on a roof or in a flower bed. A lot of people will just mount it on the fence, and then with that rubber coated 10K sensor, which comes with the optical sensor, you would just need to put that into the slab, just to, you know, feedback temperature of how hot and how cold that slab is back to the controller on there. So you have that capability of putting it in the slab and outside with that remote sensor on there. So in terms of the socket, so this is the enclosure which you would put our optical sensor in. It's made out of polycarbonate plastic, and the reason that we made it out of polycarbonate plastic is that a lot of different areas throughout the US and Canada use a lot of salt and a lot of other materials to melt snow on there. So this really makes it kind of robust. It doesn't matter if you use salt or whatever chemicals, it's not going to damage the optical sensor. Where if using a brass continuity sensor, you're going to do some cleaning on a yearly basis in terms of salt getting on there, which will corrode their sensors. With us, it's kind of maintenance free on there. So that makes it real nice for the end users. Typically, that's the last thing people think about in the winter is, hey, I need to do some maintenance on the optical sensor. So with ours, making that polycarbonate option kind of just gives that end user maintenance free conditions on there. And it also can get scratched and dented. Doesn't really matter to a certain point. Obviously, you know, if guys were to get, you know, were to chip away at the sensor, that may cause damage on there. We do provide a drainage hole at the end, at the bottom of that socket as well. So if water were to get into it, it really doesn't matter. Water's got some place to go, but we also do advise that you do provide some drainage at the underneath the sensor, just because we just don't want water puddling in there and then freezing, which could, you know, cause damage later on to that optical sensor and also to your concrete and asphalt on there. So just had a couple questions on here. So no, through the Snow 550, you have to use our optical sensor. You couldn't use like a TECMAR or a Calefi or heat timer sensor to our controllers. You have to use our snow melt sensor to our controllers. You can't mix and match on there just because of the logic of how the snow rate setup and all that. You do have to use our controllers on there. In terms of the optical sensor as well, so it'll tell the controller when it is actually snowing, and then it will actually feedback the temperature if you have it internally on there. So there's a built-in thermistor built into there. The sensor itself has a brass ring, and then as you notice on the optical socket, there's actually 4 brass plugs. So once that brass ring makes contact with those four brass plugs, it'll feedback the temperature back to the controller. So if you were ever, you know, installing this for the first time, you ever were getting an off reading, it's most likely that when they were pouring concrete, maybe some concrete or mud even got, you know, into the socket, and it's just not making proper contact with that brass ring in those brass plugs. So you really, for those scenarios, just take out the sensor. It's just 4 screws to take it out. You know, take that out, give it a wipe down, put it back in, and you'll usually get a normal temperature reading on there. In terms of new installs and when you're firing it up for your first snow melt, when it gets cold out for the first time, it usually takes about half an hour for the sensor to climatize. So if you're ever to get a kind of a wonky reading for that very first cold day on there, it's just the sensor's just climatizing. After about half an hour to an hour, depending on how cold it is, it will climatize and give you a normal temperature reading within your slab on there. So with all our 550 controllers, it's very straightforward. We use a lot of dry contacts on there. So those dry contacts are rated for 240 volts at 5 amps for each relay. Your optical sensor is it's a 5-wire sensor. So it's 4 wires will be color coded, and each sensor wire needs to go to has a designated terminal to go in there. And there's also a bare shield wire, and that shield wire will need to go in terminal 5 on there. So again, if you ever get a wonky reading in terms of your slab temperature, it's usually you put a wire incorrect into another terminal. If you were to ever do this, it doesn't cause damage to those connectors or anything like that. It just will give you an off reading, letting you know, hey, you've wired something not correctly. Just wire it up correctly, and then you get a correct temperature reading on there. You also have the option to put an external demand input. So, if you wanted to put like an on-off switch or a momentary switch into the garage, just to, turn the controller to go automatically into a melt mode, you can, hook up that switch pins 6 and 7. We can send an on-off signal onto pins 8 and 9. And then you also need to connect the system and return as well as an outdoor sensor to the controller. And then we can also control a mixing device on the Snow 550. So we can control an injection pump or like a 3-way mixing valve on there, and as well control the main system pump circulator on there. So with our controllers, we can give you all the sensors that are required for all our 550 controllers as well as our thermostats. So you don't need to buy any other accessories. We give you those sensors if you're going to use it. For that controller or for another scenario on there. And these sensors are just 10K ohm thermistors type 2 for both the strap-on sensors as well as the outdoor sensor. In terms of the controller itself, again, we can control that injection pump either for valve or pump mixing. There's also a warm weather testing feature on the Snow 550 as well. So normally, most of these jobs are getting installed in the spring and the summer. You can actually put into a setting where it actually tricks the controller thinking it's cold outside, and you actually just pour a little bit of water on the optical sensor and simulate a snow melt mode on there, and just to make sure everything is running fine. And then after about 30 minutes, it'll go back into obviously we'll go back into warm weather shutdown on the controller itself. So again, with this controller, it has built-in Wi-Fi enabled capabilities. So simply you just put into your Wi-Fi settings mode on there, and it'll connect to whatever Wi-Fi network is available on there. Once you've connected it to Wi-Fi, again, each controller has its own identifier. You simply just add those identifiers to the HBX app, adding it onto device, and then you can control each snow melt controller or a different location through the HBX app on there. In terms of the outdoor sensing, we want to have outdoor sensing with our snow melt controllers because obviously we don't want our snow melt controllers to turn on in the summer months. So we'll go into warm weather and cold weather shutdown through the use of that outdoor sensor. We do also offer a wireless outdoor option as well. This is really ideal for like retrofit applications where if you're implementing a new system, it may take you about maybe half a day's work just to get that outdoor sensor box on there, just because maybe you have to drill through a couple concrete walls or you have to fish that wire to get it to that north side facing wall. So with us, the use of this wireless outdoor sensor just makes that installation time really you can do this in about 15 to 20 minutes on there. So there's a base unit and an outdoor unit. The base unit, you really just you just wire into your thermistor input of your boiler or your heat pump. And then your outdoor sensor just runs off 2 AA batteries. You would just pair these, the outdoor unit to the base unit in your mechanical room, and you have about 2,000 feet of communication between the base unit and the outdoor unit on there. There's built in diff switches on the controller itself. So most boilers will run off a 10K or 12K frequency. So we kind of try to give you as many boiler manufacturers in the manual. Like I said, most of them run off the 10 or 12K. By default, it runs off the 10K ohm. So if your boiler needs to go off the 12K, you just need to flick the diff switch either up or down using those diff switches on there. The base unit itself has or the outdoor unit itself has a change battery indicator. So about 3 months before the batteries are gonna, run out, it'll let you know as an indicator. And there's also a strength indicator for ranging from 1 to 6 on that outdoor unit on there. So it just tells you, hey, this is the best spot, the strongest signal that you're gonna want to get. Again, we always recommend having that outdoor sensor on that north side facing wall on there. So. And the nice advantage to this is that it's low voltage. You don't need an electrician. It's just 24 volts to power up that base unit on there. Another options that we also give you with the wireless outdoor sensor is that you can actually pair up to 5 base units to 1 outdoor sensor. Just because if you had 2 or 3 or 4 boilers, you're not going to have a whole bank of outdoor sensors outside. You could pair 5 individual units to 1 outdoor sensor. Just had a couple questions here in terms of can we support a 4 to 20 mA output through the Snow 550. We don't do any modulating. If you want to do any modulating to send a modulating signal to that boiler, you just need to add on our CPU 550 or our CPU 1000 to control that. So the CPU 550 does a 0 to 10. If you need the option to do a 4 to 20 mA output, then you would have to tack on a CPU 1000 to work in conjunction with that Snow 550. So going back to our Snow 550 controller, so not going to be repetitive, but with all our Snowmelt controllers, we try to put everything onto one screen. So usually, typically 1 or 2 different screens. We also integrated a multi-screen back display. So depending on what the controller is doing, a certain color will appear on the controller. And we kind of did that more for technical support. Just because sometimes people are not the best communicators. So simply we can just tell them, hey, is the screen blue, green, or red? And we know exactly what the control is doing for that control mode on there. So it just saves time through the technical support just by having that multicolored backscreen display on there. But on the controller, it'll tell you your slab temperatures and targets. It'll tell you your system temperature. It will actually tell you if the sensor is actually picking up any snowfall. To navigate with our controllers with the 550, it's just up and down or enter. If you hold the enter button down for 2 seconds, it'll take you into a setup menu screen. So here you can navigate your snow rate setup. You can adjust your delta design temperatures. So this is your min and max system temperatures. You can set whatever delta T you want to come out for in and out of that slab on there, and you can adjust your warm weather and cold weather shutdown options on there. On the controller itself, there's a lot of different operating modes on there. So you can idle your slab all the time if you wanted to, so you can set into an idle mode. Keep in mind that's where you're going to spend a lot of your money in terms of your operating costs is into your idling temperature. So we do have options where if customers just want to go off to start off using just a cold start, you can do that as well. So essentially your system is off, but the sensor is still on, and it'll turn on going into a mild mode anytime it detects snow. But keep in mind, if you are doing a cold start, it will take a lot longer to go into seeing results in terms of melting snow compared to as an idle. So you have a couple different options on there. We do have kind of like manually operated modes. So if you wanted the controller just to work for a certain amount of days and shut off, you can use that using our anticipate feature on there. But feel free to check in our Snowmelt webinar where I'll go more in depth and go through every setting in terms of wiring through that webinar on there. Again, using the HBX ThermoLinx app, again, you just simply connect the controller to whatever Wi-Fi network is available. You're not going through routers or setting IP settings. It's just like connecting your Apple or Android device to your home network at your home on there. So you just put those network name and password through the app. Connect to it. You'll see a Wi-Fi symbol on the top right-hand corner of the screen telling that, hey, this controller is connected to Wi-Fi. You add that identifier, so a sync code and password through the app on Add Device. And once you hit save, your controller will add up. So here you can see everything through the HBX app that you would see on the controller. and you can see, you know, what devices are on and off. You can also set alarms through this as well. So if your slab temperature wherever to go below or above a certain target, you'll get an email notification on there. And the end user has the options to, you know, run a system, you know, all the time through an idle mode, or if he just wants to go through a cold start, or he has the option of just automatically triggering melt now, and he can actually set melt off on there. So the real nice thing about, you know, HBX in terms of the Wi-Fi, you can see everything, but you can actually change all your system parameters through our app on there. If you want to, again, go through advanced settings, again, there's a contractor's code that you just need to call our technical support, and this unlocks pretty much all the advanced settings just for the contractors, because typically you don't want to give, especially for the residential end users, all those parameters, because as we've learned that, you know, things, if you give access to those parameters to people, people tend to touch it. So again, we just kind of give those to the contractors. So there they can, you know, see multiple controls all in one location. You know, you can see other HBX controllers for that location as well. So say you had a snow melting system, but you're also using our zone controller, so you can see your thermostats as well as your snow melt zone on there, and as well as your boiler controller on there. So you can kind of see everything through the app on there. Again, through the use of advanced settings, you can, you know, adjust everything that you would have on the Snow 550. This makes it real ideal for contractors to have it on their phones for their clients. So if they ever were to give them a call, they can just log into their system and, you know, change a couple of different parameters and hit save, and that's it. Not actually having, you know, to go to site just to do the exact same thing on there. Typically, 9 out of 10 times, it's just a settings issue in terms of troubleshooting. Maybe their slab didn't melt all the time, so maybe they just have to add on another hour of, you know, melt time operation, or maybe they just have to increase their system temperature a little bit, and usually, you know, that'll solve the problem. So really nice for the end user as well as for the contractors, where, you know, they didn't have to make a 45-minute trip just to, you know, press a couple buttons through the actual controller itself. They can do it through the use of the ThermoLinx app on there. So now we're just going to get into our zone controllers. So again, like I mentioned earlier on the webinar, just have 2 SKUs of zone controllers. We have our Zone 550, which is incorporates into our Wi-Fi zoning system. So we came out with this system, I believe, back in 2015, and we kind of just try to make it all-in-one HVAC zone controller. And it's just a system. It's not a standalone zone controller that can be used with other thermostats. You need to use certain 2 different SKUs of thermostats with this zone controller, just because it's proprietary in terms of communication with these stats to the zone controller on there. So it's kind of a, you know, if you're using the zone controller, you're going to use the complete system on there. So again, we made this an all-in-one HVAC zone controller. So the Zone 550 can do zone pumps, zone valves, and it can also do forced air motorized dampers as well. So it can just be used for radiant applications, or you can just use it for, you know, forced air, like a furnace, air conditioner with 2 or 3 or 4 zone dampers on there. Or you can use a combination of, you know, radiant and forced air all in one HVAC zone controller. Just typically, this is what we're seeing. You know, a customer may have 2 or 3 in-floor zones, but they have like a backup furnace or a fan coil used as second stage heating or cooling, and they want to control that with a damper. So you can, you know, accommodate that with all through the Zone 550 on there. Just had a question about through the app on there. Just give me 1 second here. Yeah, so you only need 1 account. So once you add on the app and subscribe to that, you can just keep adding different locations on the app on there. So if you're just a contractor, you can, you know, have one location which is like the Smith residence. Next is like the Wilson residence on there. You don't have to add. You can keep just adding as many different jobs through your app. It's not like it's a max of like 50. You really essentially just go unlimited, and you just use a scroll bar at just adding different accounts on there. And again, it's, we're not charging you to have, you know, a certain amount of accounts. It's all just free of no charge on there. So so typically, yeah, you can have as many as accounts through the app as you want on there. So getting back onto the zone controller, so again, it's an all-in-one HVAC zone controller. We can do 4 zones per module on there. It is expandable up to, you know, 20 different zone controllers per system on there. Through the zone controller, there's a lot of different features on here. So Again, you can do zone pumps, zone valves, dampers. We get zone priority if you are using it for just in-floor heating. There's post-purge and exercising for every 72 hours of exercising those pumps on there. There's 2 demand outputs to send a signal to your boiler or heat pumps or your or for your domestic hot water tank. You can do that as well. We also have geothermal modes built in on here, so you can put into a geothermal mode where we can do 2 or 4 pipe systems on there. So all your first stage and your radiant is going to be at the bottom of the zone controller, and all your forced air elements are at the top there. So we can control a fan coil, or we can send a heat call to your furnace, or a Y call to your air conditioning unit on there. And we also have an X terminal to control humidity, so you can control a humidifier or dehumidifier all in the zone 550 on there. In terms of damper control, we can accommodate for both types. We can accommodate for normally open and normally closed. So it's all built in terms of logic, and you actually can have, not necessarily why you would do this, but say you had, 2 dampers that were normally open and 2 dampers normally closed on there. You could have those all both on the same zone controller. You wouldn't need to separate them based on the damper type on there. So that makes it real nice in terms of how you want to implement different equipment on the zone controller on there. So in terms of wiring, it's very straightforward. It's just 120 to power up the unit itself. You also provide power to your zone outputs at the bottom. So you would just put whatever power onto pins 11 and 12. So you could put 120 in there. Again, it's rated up to 240 at 5 amps. So whatever power you put in to pins 11 and 12 gets distributed out to your zone outputs for zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and zone 4 on there. We also can control your main system pump on there. And your air, like I mentioned before, your air elements are on the top of the zone controller. So you can control your RW, Y, and G's to make a heat call. For your fan coil furnace, make a Y call to your air conditioner unit, or a cooling call to your fan coil unit. G to run your fan. We can run that fan manually on off or intermittently. So you have the option to control different fan options. And then again, you can hook up your humidifier or dehumidifier to the X terminal on there. All your thermostats also get connected at the top of the zone controller. So you can use our THM 500 or THM 300, which we'll talk about in the next couple slides. The real nice thing in terms of wiring is that those stats, there's only 2 wires back to the zone controller. So it's just power and communication. You don't have to put 24 volts, to these stats. It's getting its power from the zone controller, and it's communicating back to the zone controller. So we kind of call it a communicating stat with the zone 550. So you can do up to 2 stages of heating and 2 stages of cooling, and provide humidity control off those 2 wires. So that makes it really perfect for like retrofit older homes. If you want to update those homes, you don't have to put any existing infrastructure in terms of wiring for the thermostats, which is real nice on there. So in terms of doing more than 4 zones, we also have added wireless communication between zone controllers, so they can actually talk to each other just through radio frequency. Again, it's 2,000 feet open air communication between zone controllers. So how you would do this is you strictly would put a master zone controller. So zones 1 to 4 is your master, and anything other zones 5 to 8 would just pair to that master zone controller. How you do this, which we'll talk about in a different webinar in terms of zoning, it's all done by the thermostat. So it makes it real nice. The thermostat tells you that you've actually paired, that it's actually into discovery mode, and pairing is successful on there. So it makes it real nice. If you have separate mechanical rooms, or you want to have a zone controller to each, they don't have to be right beside each other. You can have different zone controllers throughout the mechanical room. Or, like I said, you may have one mechanical room that's on one floor to another floor, and you want to make sure you have priorities so you can pair them to each other without wiring them or daisy chaining together, which is real nice on there. So with our stats to the Zone 550, again, you can use the 500 or the 300 series. In terms of functionality, everything, there's no difference except for humidity control. If you need humidity control, then you need to go to our touchscreen stat, but anything else, there's no difference in terms of functionality on there. Again, you can have 2 stages of heating, 2 stages for cooling for each stat if you wanted to. You could have heat only, 2 heat only with cooling. So you have about 8 or 9 different options in terms of your heating and cooling types on there. You can have up to 2 external thermistor inputs. So with these stats, you can do it off the air temperature, or you can do it off the floor, or you can have it for both on there. So if you want to do a floor minimum and floor maximum, and your floor ever were to go below or above those temperatures, then it's your floor that's driving the stat. If your floor temperatures are above those, in between those parameters, then it's going off the air for that dual sensing on there. These stats are PID stats, so it's made for rating the application, so it's not going to overshoot or undershoot on that radiant slab on there. So again, we give you that external sensor, so it's up to you to use it or not. If you want to do it off the floor, you can use that sensor to go off, outdoor temperature, or if you want a room average with the stat and the sensor. So you have about 4 or 5 different options of how you want to use that external sensor to that HBX stat on there. Just give me 1 second here. Just had a question: how far can the controllers be apart from each other? So again, it's 2,000 feet open air from each other. Keep in mind that will shrink depending on how many walls you're going through, but typically this day I've only seen about 1 or 2 controllers not paired to each other. That was because they put these kind of control panels into the concrete, into the floor on there, so it was kind of shielding the RF, and it was too far of a distance to get into there, but it's rated for 2,000 feet on there. Communication on there. Again, it's just open air. In terms of external sensors, so a lot of, for the bigger kind of jobs that we do, we're doing a lot of these big 16, 17 zone systems, and the customers don't want to have 16, 17 thermostats spread out throughout the home on there. So another option is just to put all the thermostats in the mechanical room and just run sensors throughout each zones on there. So you still could do the off the air and the floor on there. So that's why we have the ability to run up to 2 sensors per stat on there. So you could have one into the floor, or you can use a drywall flush mount sensor, which is real nice. Using these sensors, you can paint over them. You wouldn't even know it's there. The client has access to each thermostat on the app, so I have different thermostats spread out through the house if you have it on your smartphone, smart device on there. So it's just another option where you can have the stat or use the flush mount sensors into the drywall on there. With our sister company as well, we can also prefabricate control packages for you guys as well. So if you had, typically if you had a bigger job, we can, program all the controllers, wire everything for you in these prefabricated control panels. The contractor simply just has to mount these to the wall and just run the sensors to the stats on there. So it makes everything a lot simpler. The customer knows which thermostat goes to where. Everything will, they can connect it to Wi-Fi and just run these sensors on there. So we do have an option to do kind of these prefabricated control panels, and we can also do the control side as well. So that's something that you can also talk to our sister company, HYDRONIC, for options like this for those bigger homes on there. So in terms of getting these zone controllers connected to Wi-Fi, we don't have these built in internally. You do need to use our TMX 100, which is our Wi-Fi communication. You only need to use one of these, even though if you had like 5 different zone controllers, you only need one TMX 100, which can do up to 20 zones per system on there. It kind of acts like a mini router like you would see at your home. You simply press the left button on the top left-hand corner, hold it down for 10 seconds. Once you let go and release that button, you'll start seeing the red LED Wi-Fi button start to flash. Once you start seeing the flash, it's telling you that, hey, I want to connect to your Wi-Fi network. Once you see it flashing, you'd open up your Wi-Fi settings of your device. You'll see a ThermoLinx network there. Connect to that network, wait for the check mark, and then open up the HBX app. It'll automatically redirect you into your Wi-Fi setup, and there you can either on Apple just put in your information. Android devices will actually display the Wi-Fi networks that are available. You simply just select that, put in the password, and connect now. And usually within 30 seconds to a minute, you'll see all 3 LED lights become solid on the Wi-Fi module, telling us that, hey, we've connected to your Wi-Fi, whatever network is available at that location on there. Again, each thermostat has a zone identifier. You simply add that identifier through the app, and all your thermostats would populate for that location on there. So you don't have to individually add each thermostat using the system, because everything is going through that zone controller. You just need to put one thermostat on the app, and they all populate on there. There you can give a customized name for each zone, which will also be displayed on the thermostat. And then here you can see exactly what your whole system is doing. You can see if it's heating or cooling, if you're just running the fan on there. Again, you can add on other controllers, so you can see your snow melt system on there as well, or your boiler controller on there. So it makes it real nice. You can implement your local weather on there, so you know how cold it is outside. On there you can put different priorities for heating to cooling. Just typically you maybe want to use a zone for your domestic hot water, and you may want to put priority for that, or you may want to have priority for, you know, your kitchen or bedroom for first thing in the morning. So make sure that those always get heated first before other zones that are typically not used through that residential or commercial application on there. For different zone options, you can simply, you know, increase or decrease the options. There's home and away modes. So if you're on vacation, or, you know, typically zones that you're typically not using through the day, you can put those into an away mode. So typically we'll go into a cooler mode, and then you'll just activate them when you are utilizing them on there. You do have the options to set alarms. So you can put a temperature trigger for below or above a certain temperature trigger, and that will give you an option to get email notifications saying, hey, there's, you know, your domestic hot water tank just went below, you know, 100 degrees. You may want to check it out on there. So you do have that capability of getting alarm notifications on there. There's auto changeover from heating to cooling, so you don't have to, you know, it does it for you. You don't have to set it as a, you know, heat control for the winter and then cooling control for the summer. You can just put when you want your heating and cooling to turn on, and it automatically will change over for heating or cooling. In terms of schedule, you have weekend and weekday options, and then again you have that advanced settings where you can set up pretty much your entire system through the phone. You don't actually have to touch any of the thermostats as long as it's connected to Wi-Fi on there. So it's just all around. It's a really cool system. Once you've used it once, you're typically, you know, most customers are very impressed about the functionality and how simple it is to program and wire just using our HYDRONIC network app on there. For guys that are just wanting your normal everyday zone controller, we have our Zone 500, kind of the same logic with our Zone 550. You can do 4 zones, pumps or valves. There's no forced air elements on there, but you can use anyone's thermostat. So it doesn't have to be an HBX thermostat. You can use, you know, whatever thermostats in the market, commonly 2 or 3 or 4 wire thermostats to the Zone 500 on there. Again, 2 demand outputs to external controllers for your boiler, for your heat pumps on there. There's 2 sets of diff switches on the back, so you can set your priorities and tell the controller if you're using pumps or valves on there. So this is kind of your everyday zone controller. You know, the end user doesn't care about Wi-Fi. They don't got, you know, fan coils, furnaces. They want to, you know, control. So this Zone 500 is a good option for those more simple systems on there. Other thermostats that we have is our THM 100. It's just a single heat, single cool stat. You can actually use this thermostat as a SETPOINT controller. So in Western Canada, you know, I would say a good chunk of the amount of jobs on there, you just would use this stat for as a digital aquastat on there. So you can put it into SETPOINT mode. You can actually use the sensor that comes with the stat and use that as a digital aquastat, just because we're very price competitive to an actual mechanical aquastat, but you get a digital display with it. So it's kind of a no-brainer where you can actually use it as that SETPOINT controller on there. We also have a THM 200 option. So again, same option as our THM 100, except we can do heating and cooling at the same time on there. So again, we can do up to 3 stages with the THM 200, and it can actually be used as a single stage boiler controller with outdoor reset if you really wanted to. So you can actually use the stat as a boiler control with the 200 version on there. So now we're just kind of getting away from thermostats and their zone controllers. If you want to sign up for the webinar for that, we really go a lot more in depth in terms of how to set up and, you know, wire everything with the Wi-Fi zoning system with that webinar. But now we're just kind of cutting it close on time. We're going to go talk about our SensorLinx, our BTU heat meters on there. So this is a new product that we're releasing this year. I would say we're going to have an official launch probably in May, maybe June, of actually releasing this product. So the SensorLinx is a BTU heat metering solution. What it really can do is that it can measure temperature, pressure, and flow with only 2 sensors only on your return and supply sensors. Really the big thing with the SensorLinx sensors is that there's wireless communication between your return and supply sensors. there's a lot of standards coming out in the US in terms of in Canada in terms of how you can actually use thermal meters for billing purposes. A lot of these manufacturers are going to come from Europe, and a typical BTU meter, comes with like a main hub controller with 2 temperature probes, and these probes, you're kind of limited on distance on there, where the maximum distance of these sensors is typically about 2 meters, and you can't cut or splice these sensors because it affects the resistance on there. So in Europe, that's kind of the go-to. A lot of the mechanical systems, everything's very compact, everything's close together. But the North American market, that's not the case. Your return and supply piping may be 20 to 30 feet away from each other. So typically, if you want to use other PTU meters, you're going to have to do some repiping, and that's going to, unfortunately, that's going to cost a lot of money, especially if you're doing retrofits. With the SensorLinx sensors, like I said, wireless communication between them, so you can put them wherever you want to. We don't know the maximum distance, but these can go hundreds of feet communication between them from the return and supply sensors. It really makes it ideal for retrofit as well as new building construction on there. So that really what separates us from everybody else in the market. That's a patent pending process in terms of the communication on there. The sensors can monitor different flow ranges, so we can go anywhere from 0 to 106 gallons per minute with these sensors on there. We'll give you options for stainless steel as well as composite on there. It really depends on how you want to use these sensors. The sensors have, again, very, very small or very attractive in terms of installing them into very tight spaces. So you can install them vertically or horizontally. If you can actually put them into actual units of apartments and condos, if you're wanting to use these sensors for billing purposes on there. In terms of wiring, this is 24 volts just to power up the sensors itself. You have the capability of using thermistor options. So if you want to just use this as a regular flow meter, you just need one of these sensors, and you can actually want to get the actual temperature out from your domestic hot water tank. You can put a thermistor right into the tank connected to that flow sensor on there. We also have option for relay operation. So if you wanted to control a pump or a valve based off temperature, pressure, flow, we can activate that relay to operate that. So say you had a leak in your system and your flow were to drop, we can actually close or close that pump or valve on there. Or if you have your boiler's putting out too much heat, you may want to open a pump, or it has too much pressure, you may want to open a pump to relieve that pressure on there. So you can kind of actually use these sensors for that temperature, flow, pressure calculation, but you can also use it as kind of an equipment safety device as well on there. So that makes it real beneficial on there. And there's also a modulating output on there. So if you need us to modulate that pump, at the present time, we can do a 0 to 3.5 BDC, but later on this year, we're probably going to try to get to a 0 to 10 in terms of modulating from these sensors on there. So all the communication is built in through Wi-Fi. Again, you just hold a set button on the SensorLinx sensors, connect to whatever Wi-Fi is available, and that's it. Again, there's an identifier on the back of the sensors. You just add that in, and you can see everything from temperature, flow, or pressure on there. These sensors also have a built-in Wi-Fi communication already in there. So say you had put this in a commercial space, and for whatever reason, this commercial building doesn't have any Wi-Fi to connect to. So you can actually just go into these sensors locally and get all the data from the last time you presently went through there through the internal Wi-Fi communications. You can kind of use these sensors as like a regular meter if you're not having any Wi-Fi on there. So you have two different options of connecting that information, but most people will connect it to Wi-Fi just because they don't want to pay third-party reader meters. They can get all this data in real time using the HBX ThermoLinx app on there. Other network options through the SensorLinx, we can connect to like a BACnet or a Modbus using our open IP on our servers for us to connect to these building management systems through this. This is something that we're later on going to be adding on to our 550 series. So if you need our snowmelt controller to be connected to BACnet or our boiler controller, it's going to be through this open API done through our network. That's what we've already built for the SensorLinx heat meters on there. So again, the app is free on there. You can see a lot of information. You can get data in raw numbers or through graphing. You can see your flow. So if you want to, use this to balance your hydronic system instead of, manually going to each pump on there. You can kind of just do it through the app, and you can see that real-time line graphing. In terms of using these sensors to monitor, just for flow or for the actual heating BTUs, you can see it through daily, weekly, monthly, all through the app. So if you need to kind of, if you ever get a big utility bill on there, you can kind of justify that, hey, on these certain days I really had big spikes in terms of flow and the amount of heat that I was producing. Justify it through the HBX app, again, which is free on there. You can also adjust your fluid type, so you can use this for glycol, ethanol, or methanol, depending on what application on there. You can put in your implement your concentration, and it will calculate based on the concentration that you're using on the app on there. You can get alarms either again for flow, temperature, or pressure. You'll get notified through email, and you can actually manually just turn on a relay with the app as well on there. So something in terms of like building management for residential, for apartments or condos, for those commercial applications, we actually built software if you want to use these sensors to actually build tenants on there. So this is kind of separate from the app. Here you can actually sign up through our SensorLinx.ca website and just actually open up an account with us. There you can actually implement different locations, different buildings throughout your sensor. So here you would just add on your sensors for that location on there. You can name those locations on there, so a building management company can just log in. They actually can see what each sensor is producing for heat for that month or weekly or daily, whatever you want to see it. You can give customized ranges in terms of how you want to charge these tenants through the SensorLinx options on there. For building management operators, again, they can see how much each tenant is using. So if you have one tenant that's a lot of heat that's coming off of there, you can kind of tell that, hey, maybe they have windows open during the winter and it's costing you. So you can actually notify them, hey, something's going on, you need to close those windows on there. And then you can actually generate bill runs using our software. So we're kind of giving you the full package of equipment as well as the end usage in terms of how you want to use these sensors using this kind of building management system through our SensorLinx software on there. So that's kind of a nutshell of what we can do with those BTU, or just use it as a regular flow meter on there. So we're just gonna kind of end the webinar, just gonna talk about our boiler controllers and our heat pump controllers on there. So again, just 2 SKUs for the boiler and geothermal control options. Our CPU1000 was actually our first controller that we ever launched out to market back in 2005. So it took us about 2 years from the company founded to actually put out our first controller. So the whole basis of the CPU1000 series, and as well as our Eco1000 series for the geothermal applications, is all built off modular expandability. So the main unit itself can do up to 2 stages. If you need to do up to more than 2 boilers, you just add on expansion modules to that 1000 just to give you additional relay contacts on there. So the main unit itself, again, can do 2 on and off boilers and control up to 3 pumps. So you can control up to 2 system pumps as well as domestic hot water pump. You do have domestic hot water capabilities with all our boiler controllers on there. So it has built-in brownout detection. We have pump sequencing as well as the 1000 on the 1000 series. We give you line voltage for those pump contacts already, so you don't have to put in junction boxes or anything to that. You're already getting 120 volts coming out of those contacts already on there. You have numerous demand signals, so you can have it based off outdoor reset, or if your sensor wherever to go, it'll automatically go into the coldest day in terms of your demand output to your boiler on there. You can have different firing options with the 1000. You can have high or low fire. You can stage your boilers based off lag time, so you can do it from 1 minute to 240 minutes worth of lag time on there. In terms of navigating control, it's just 2 different screens. You can your main status screen, you can pretty much see all your information as well as your time and date, and then your second screen just tells you the number of cycles for your boilers and your pumps, and it'll also tell you if it's in a warm weather shutdown on the CPU1000. So again, the main unit itself can do up to 2 stages. So if you wanted to add on more than 2 stages, you would just add on an EXP100, which gives you an additional 2 stages of boiler. So you can add up a maximum of 6 EXP100s to the CPU1000 for a total of 14 stages. So that's the maximum boiler stages that we can do, is 14 with the CPU 1000. Again, these are just dry contacts, 240 at 10 amps on the 1000 series compared to 5 amps on the 550s on there, so you get a little bit more pump control with the 1000 series. We do have an expansion modules for those pumps as well, so if you had wanted to control more than 3 pumps, then that's when you would add on our EXP300, and again, we have 120 volts coming out of these already. If you want to modulate devices, then this is where you want to add on our Mod 100. We can do a total of a maximum of 5 modulating devices with the 1000 controller. Each Mod 100 again gives you an ability to do 2 modulating devices to a maximum of three units. That third unit we're only able to do 1 for a total of 5 modulating devices on there. So we can do a 0 to 10 or a 4 to 20 MA output with the Mod 100, and it's just diffs selectable on the back of that expansion module. In terms of our CPU 550, we kind of just really simplify this compared to the 1000 controller. We can do a lot of different things. Where the 550, we can do 3 on and off boilers or a single modulating boiler for a 0 to 10. We can't do a 4 to 20 MA output. You'd have to use the CPU 1000 for that modulating type on there. But when you power up the controller, the CPU 550, you can use this as a staging controller for your boilers, or you can use this as a staging controller and control a mixing device. There's 2 different options of 2 different set points you can control with the 550, or you can just use it as a pump sequencer controller as well. So you get 5 different application modes built into one controller, which is real nice on there. Again, in terms of wiring, it's pretty straightforward. 2 demand outputs for for your heating device. If you want to control domestic hot water, you can use demand input, and then you just use the last 4 relays to control as many boilers that you want to on the controller. So you can do, again, a maximum of 3 boilers, and we have a maximum of 4 contacts. So if you were utilizing 3 boilers, you can control 1 pump. If you're using 1 boiler, then you have ability to control up to 3 pumps on there. So depending on how many boilers you're using, determines how many relays you can add on for pump control. You can always add on external relays if you need more pump controller to the CPU 550. You're not limited by that. You can pretty much do anything with tacking on more relays on there. Again, the net control shows everything on one screen. You can see your boiler system temperatures as well as your outdoor temperature on there. By the end of this month, this controller will be Wi-Fi enabled as well. So look out for the notice for that, where you have, again, built-in external Wi-Fi communication with the CPU 550 on there. Again, just like the Snow 550, it's just up and down and enter to navigate the controller. It's simply just going to ask you questions about your setup. You just have to implement those parameters into the controllers and adjust how you want to stage your boilers based off like time. If you want to rotate your boilers based off hours or run time, you can do that as well. And you also have domestic hot water capabilities for domestic hot priorities and such when you are implementing that within the controller. So again, for staging, we can do 3 on and off boilers or a single modulating boiler on there. In terms of mixing mode, we can do control an injection pump or a 3-way mixing valve on there, modulating pumper valve on there. So you have those 3 different options on the controller to control a mixing device on there. If you want to use this as a pump sequencer, again, we can do two pumps, and you can control them manually or based off outdoor reset on there, and they'll just sequence based off time or based off runtime cycles on there. You also get a foolproof alarm as well. So if your pumps are running dry, they'll automatically shut off to prevent any damage through your pumps on there. You can also use this as a differential set point. So if you're transferring heat from different tanks, this is where you would probably want to tack on for this control mode on there. Or if you want to use it as a dual 2 independent set points, we have a dual set point option on there. So just kind of give you the capabilities compared to like a Tecmar line. Our CPU 1000, just the controller itself, the expansion modules, replaces up to 10 different SKUs with one controller with the 1000 series. With the 550 series, you can see we can place up to 20 different SKUs with just a single CPU 550 on there. So it's real beneficial for contractors, wholesalers that we've implemented these multiple control modes built into one. It just makes everyone's life a lot easier, and it's a lot easier for the contractors where they can kind of use it every other week with the 550 controller. Lastly, not going to get in this too much, but with our geothermal controllers, it's really the same basis as our boiler controllers. Our Eco 1000 can do up to, again, 14 heat pumps or chillers. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be used for heat pumps. It can also be used for chillers on there. We can do single or dual tank systems. Again, you can run your outdoor reset for your hot tank. Cold tank setup is just based off a manually inputted set point for cold tank, but just for the 1000 you can do outdoor reset for your cold tank on the Eco 550. We can run our reversing valve or diverting valves as well on the Eco 1000, and you also have the capability to control a backup heat source with the 1000 series. Again, we can do 2 heat pumps on the main controller itself, and then you would just add on EXP 100s to accumulate for more stages if you are utilizing more than 3 stages. Anything 3 stages or less, you want to go to our Eco 550. Again, 3 heat pumps on and off, or 2 heat pumps and a backup boiler option on there. Again, we can do single or dual tank systems for hot or cold tanks on there, all with outdoor reset. Operate reversing valve, but we do have that built-in Wi-Fi communication on the Eco 550 in terms of getting alarms for your hot tank or cold tank, or if the contractors manually wants to log in to adjust any settings, he has the capability of doing that with the Eco 550 on there. So again, navigating through the app, you can see what devices are on and off. Again, we have the advanced settings for contractors, so remotely log in, adjust any leg time, or if he wants to adjust his rotation time for his heat pumps or backup boiler, he has the capability through the use of the HBX ThermoLinx app on there. In terms of the wiring, again, very straightforward. Everything is dry contacts, 240 at 5 amps, and he just uses those relays for the amount of heat pumps he wants to control. He can control that system pump, and then the last 3 relay is to control the reversing valve on there. Again, log into those webinars later this month. We'll go to each control, go through all the settings and how you would wire up through the use of those webinars on there. So we've already talked about this with our other controllers in terms of, the heat pumps logic on there. You can rotate them, you can offstage them, you can have, the backup boiler come on based off, outdoor temperature or based off tank temperature, or just as a separate leg time on there. So it really makes it kind of a really easy universal geothermal heat pump controller on there. So yeah, that's kind of our webinar in a nutshell. Just try to cram everything into that 1 hour segment on there in terms of trying to put as much information on there. I just had a question about the geothermal controller here. Just give me 1 second. Just kind of have to open this up a little bit here. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the CPU controllers, our CPU 550 will be Wi-Fi enabled probably by the end of this month. We've already finished testing on it. It's just getting that software integrated into the next production run on there. So probably anything from May 1st of 2020, the CPU 550 will be Wi-Fi enabled on there. Just had a question about the heat pumps. Can you run a hot and chill tank at the same time? You could, but you would need to use 2 Eco 550s or 2 Eco 1000s to have that capability on there. The logic is that if you were to get a heating and cooling demand at the same time, you can set a priority for that in terms of heating and cooling. So whatever you set as priority, or whatever heat demand or cool demand comes first, it'll satisfy that demand first, and then automatically switch over to heating or cooling, if that makes sense on there. Yeah, I can email you a copy of the recording. All our webinars are recorded. I can definitely can send you an email of this webinar on there. I also encourage everyone to go register for the other webinars throughout the month there, where we kind of, again, go through each controller a lot easier and slower, than this 1 hour time of kind of going through everything. So you can really learn a lot more through the use of those webinars. But I thanks everyone for joining this webinar. Hope you kind of learned a little bit about what each controller can kind of do. Again, you can send an email to info@hbxcontrols.com or go on our website. We do again have that live chat, so if you need a question to be answered there, you can look for that as well on there. So I'll just stick around, for the next 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions they need to ask, I'll answer them. But if not, thanks for joining. Thanks, guys. In terms of Wi-Fi control, the plan is that the Eco 550 will be the only controller to have that Wi-Fi capability. We're going to try to do it sooner rather than later, where we're actually going to be having the capability of actually expanding more than 3 stages through the use of multiple Eco 550s. So say you had 4 or 5 heat pump stages, you simply would just tack on another Eco 550 to your system, and again they would wirelessly pair to each other just like our zone controllers. And then if you wanted to go that route, then you would just need to use the Eco 550 on there. No, you wouldn't need the boiler control unless you actually wanted us to control the boiler, Dave. There's a demand output on the top of the Zone 550. So whenever zone calls for heating, it'll automatically send like a TT or a LT to your boiler to fire up. So you wouldn't need a boiler control unless you wanted us to actually control the boiler itself. But no, the Zone 550 will send the signal to the boiler to fire up. Yes, it would also send a signal to the chiller as well. So there would be in that scenario you would there would be there's like a CD demand on there, so it'll fire up the signal to the chiller. So yeah, it'll do that as well. Will do.